Which diet is best, a low-carb or a low-fat diet, in a randomized trial? This is an important paper. I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and it's really kind of exciting to see the Stanford Diet Research Group, led by Christopher Gardner, one of the premier diet groups in the world. They studied diets from the A to Z study, which was Atkins to Zone. And of all the clinical trialists, I have to say they've been open to studying the whole range of carbohydrate intake and the whole range of fat intake, without preconception of what might be best or worse. And so I have to say that I was part of the reviewing process for this paper. So and it's publicly there. It's from the Frontiers in Nutrition journal, and it's from July 12, 2023. The title is Weight, Insulin Resistance, Blood Lipids, and Diet Quality Changes Associated with Ketogenic and Ultra-Low-Fat Dietary Patterns, a secondary analysis of the DietFit's randomized clinical trial by Aronica and colleagues, including Christopher Gardner. So this study, remember rule number one, you shouldn't say the result in the title. They didn't. So they, in an unbiased, non-conclusive way, just said what the study was about. So what they did is they took a randomized controlled trial, carefully controlled and run study. And the reason randomized controlled trials are so valuable and why we insist upon them to determine causation, and is that you can manipulate one or a few variables or a dietary pattern and try to adjust for all the other things at the same time in a forward-looking or prospective manner. And then the randomization procedure means that the individual coming into the study doesn't know which study group they're going to be in. So let's say you wanted to get into the low-carb diet and you get into the study, but you were randomized to the low-fat diet. You don't have choice. You have to do the low-fat diet for that period of time. And so randomization takes away the idea that you can choose what to do, and also accounts for a lot of the things that we can't measure. There are unmeasurable things that might be systematically present in one group or another. And so to kind of save all of the worry about whether the groups were similar or not, if you have a large enough number of people and randomize them, then you can be pretty confident that there wasn't any unmeasurable factor present there that would skew the results. And of course, probably the number one rule about science is that the hallmark of science is replication. So that the first time you see a study, well, that's interesting, that's great. You want to wait, or you want to have the second study to show that it can be replicated. Then that becomes more of scientifically sure, and so the hallmark of science is replication. And this randomized trial was previously published, 3 months and 12 months results. And as I remember, the study had trouble keeping people on their different diets. So that while they wanted people to be at a certain carb level, they really didn't achieve that in the people. So you want to see what the intent of the study was, and then the actual results of did the people follow the diet as it was supposed to be followed. And typically in these studies, even though this is one of the best dietary clinical trial centers, they're not really well versed in studying a keto diet or a low-carb diet. I'm not aware that the Stanford group actually reached out to any keto clinical person or researcher for that matter. I've never collaborated with them. I don't think Jeff Volek has, or Steve Finney, my colleagues in the research world. But so the other interesting thing is the ability to keep people on the protocol is limited in a research study. So even though I'm going to go through this and show some results, I think 10% of the people actually stayed on this level of carbohydrate or fat restriction over the 12-month period. And so in the clinical world, actually, I can do better with adherence and keeping people on a plan, because I can pull out, the social history and get really into people's motivational reasons and help people in ways that you might be limited in a clinical trial protocol. You have to follow a certain protocol. And then I can be a cheerleader in a clinical setting, saying you can do this, when you're probably less likely to be cheerleading in a clinical trial that's trying to just study the diet change. But so what they did in the secondary analysis, which means it wasn't the primary reason for doing the study, is they looked at the subgroups of people who ate very low carb, and they called it keto-like, or KLD, ketogenic-like diet. It's funny that's being used. And then ultra-low-fat diet is the other extreme. So basically, it's like Ornish versus Atkins. And actually, Christopher Gardner did that A to Z study where there were Atkins, Zone, Ornish in there. And so the idea was, let's look at the metabolic markers among people who actually followed these extreme diets, and see what happened in them, rather than average them out into the whole group like the initial results were published. So, it's kind of like the study that we've been kind of mulling over, or said it would really be great at Duke to do the Duke rice diet versus the Duke keto diet, because the rice diet at Duke has been around for a long time, and you can't actually go on the rice diet at Duke anymore. The program doesn't exist. It closed, but no question it worked to have ultra low fat. I think it was rice, fruit, and fish, about 800 calories a day. So it was ultra low calorie as well. Certainly worked for blood pressure control and weight loss. And the director of that program would kind of argue, your way, my way. Well, we said it would be great to do a study of comparing these two approaches. So this gets close to that, although it doesn't. That wasn't the primary reason of the study, but you have the randomization so that you have that bias eliminating or reducing procedure, and then you can look at the metabolic outcomes of these people at both the extreme diets. And what was very interesting, it's got the methodology. A lot of it's referring back to the first publication, but you have 18 people, so the number of people was whittled down over time. 18 who did the keto-like, and then 21 who did the ultra-fat. So that would be 18 for the keto-like Atkins, 21 for the ultra-low-fat Ornish or Pritikin-like diet. And they seemed similar at baseline. And what was very interesting is that they looked at measures of kind of looking at the cholesterol levels in the old way, which is total and LDL. And they also looked at the cholesterol levels the new way, incorporating metabolic syndrome ideas, and that's the triglyceride and HDL. And so you see how the different diets affected these different outcomes. And a lot of people didn't follow it, but that's another issue. I mean, I encourage research centers who are doing studies on these kinds of diets to collaborate with or get consultation with people who actually have decades of clinical experience with it. In fact, that's what I did 20 years ago. I visited doctors who had used the low-carb keto diet. I didn't create it. I just studied it. But I went to doctors who were using it and used their methods to thinking that maybe they learned something after using something for 30 years in a clinic. So basically, both groups had weight loss and improvements in the different metabolic parameters. And even though it's a very small kind of study with only about 20 people per group, what they found was that the 3 months and 12 months is that the cardiovascular risk factors and weight loss happened for both the keto-like diet and the ultra-low-fat diet at 3 months, so that both of them worked. They just worked in different ways. And this, again, it's a small study, it's a first look, but one of the conclusions was basically that this looks at cardiometabolic risk factors. These diets need to be studied in outcome studies. So in other words, with hard outcomes like heart disease and death and dying, those sorts of things, and it's high time that these diets be studied. I'm not sure there's going to be much money or the will to do it, because the NIH put all the money in the low-fat diet and even did a huge study. I think the bill was something like $500 million for the Women's Health Initiative low-fat diet study, and it didn't work. So if you're competing for money, and the criticism will be, well, we studied diet and it had no effect. Well, they studied the wrong diet. and in fact, that low-fat diet is kind of dying a political death, because no one really talks about it much unless you're in a center that's using it specifically, or if it's a plant-based low-fat without all the junk food kind of programs. But it's time now to study these diets. In fact, the conclusion was further research is needed to compare the effect of these diets to a Mediterranean diet in an outcome study with cardiac endpoints and total mortality. So, great study, actually the same journal, Frontiers, but that was the video I did on the study that was cross-sectional and not high methodology, was in the same group of journals called Frontiers, but this is Frontiers in Nutrition, and it was a randomized control trial. Even though it was a small number of people, they found results that were positive for both extreme diets. And so it really cries out for opening the minds of people who think one size fits all, or there's only one way to go about things. And yes, it needs to be done again, larger sample size. And I hope the PI, or the first author here, Lucia Ronica, and Dr. Gardner, Christopher Gardner, will continue to study these, to the external world it seems like extreme things, but in the clinical obesity treatment world, we know that diet is very powerful, and it can be, actually the adherence can be improved in many different ways if you have consultation with someone in the clinical world who's used it for a long, long time. So this one I would say is Keto Doctor approved, showing at least I would say a secondary analysis, and that it's hypothesis generating, not, doesn't definitively say it, but it looks like both of the ultra low fat, Ornish-like, and the ultra low carb, Atkins-like diets are having good metabolic results. If you like this, press like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. And if you don't have my top 10 tips on how to start keto right, check in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, and check out adaptyourlifeacademy.com.